For a while I was letting it slide, just trying to keep the peace. But one day, they kept sending all that water into my yard. And I thought, enough's enough. So I sent it back. Not with a lawsuit, not with some shouting match, just with dirt, stones, and a little patience. I live in a quiet little subdivision outside of Cedar Ridge, North Carolina. The kind of place where people wave when they drive by, but don't really know your middle name. That's where I've lived with my wife for the past 12 years. When we first moved here, our twins were still in elementary school. The house was perfect for us. The backyard was the deal breaker. It sloped gently away from the house, with a big red maple off to the right. Enough space for a grill, a dog run, and the kind of grass that feels good under your bare feet. No gravel, no ant hills. It was just the right amount of space for us to breathe, to enjoy life. Then, summers here are something else. They're dramatic. You can count on the storms to roll, in like they're carrying a grudge. One afternoon, the sky turns this weird greenish gray, thunder rattles the windows, and rain starts falling like it's trying to wash the world away. Then an hour later, it's all gone. The sun comes out, and the whole neighborhood steams like a sauna. That's life here. You just roll with it. The first puddle appeared late, May after one of those gully washer storms. I remember standing at the kitchen sink, drying a plate, looking out the window, and seeing a big patch of water near the back fence. It wasn't a big deal at first, just a shallow sheet of water reflecting the clouds above. Nothing crazy. I figured the ground was saturated, and it'd dry up the next day. No big deal. But then the second storm hit. Same spot, only bigger. What had been a puddle turned into a small pond. It stayed there for 3 days. The grass around it turned darker, almost bruised looking. And when I walked on it, my boots sank in a little, making that squelching sound nobody likes. That's when I started to pay attention. Behind us, there was a newly renovated house. The owners were a young couple, maybe in their early 30s. The guy's name was Brandon. I'd met him once when they moved in. He had a firm handshake and a clean truck. The kind of guy who talks about resale value like it's a hobby. They'd redone everything. Fresh concrete patio, crisp landscaping, new gutters that gleamed in the sun. Looked sharp. I'll give them that. But then there was this pipe. A white PVC pipe, maybe 4 inches wide, sticking out from the back wall of their house, angled slightly downward and pointed straight at my yard. It didn't blend in at all. At first, I thought maybe it was temporary, like the contractor hadn't buried it yet. Maybe it was part of some unfinished drainage system. You try to give people the benefit of the doubt, especially when you share a fence line. Then the next storm came. I happened to be home that afternoon. The sky cracked open, and rain poured down in sheets. I was at the kitchen window again. Same sink, same view. And that's when I saw it. Water poured off their new concrete patio like a waterfall. It rushed toward the back corner, disappeared into that white pipe, and blasted out with force, like a fire hose aimed straight at my lawn. Not a trickle, not a gentle stream. No, this was a steady, powerful jet that carved a shallow channel in my grass in minutes. I just stood there, towel in hand, watching it. My chest tightened. Their yard stayed dry. Perfectly usable. No pooling, no mud. All that runoff, directed with precision, ended up on my side of the fence. By the time the storm passed, my yard was a mess again. The shallow pond was back, only now it was deeper. The surface rippled where the stream had hit. It didn't feel like an accident anymore. The next morning, I walked over and knocked on Brandon's door. He answered in gym shorts, holding a coffee mug with some real estate logo on it. I kept my voice even. "Hey, I wanted to talk to you about that drainage pipe in your backyard." He blinked like he hadn't even thought about it. "What about it?" "It's sending a lot of water into my yard. I've got standing water back there now after every storm." He took a sip from his mug and shrugged. "Water flows downhill, man. That's just gravity." "Sure," I said, nodding. "But this isn't natural flow. It's being directed." He leaned against the doorframe, casual. "The contractor said it's standard meets code. Everybody's got to deal with rain," he said like he was reading from some script. I wasn't trying to start anything, just wondering if there was a way to redirect it so it doesn't dump into my yard. "If there's an issue," he said, already stepping back inside, "you'd have to talk to the contractor." And just like that, the door closed. I called the contractor, left a message. He called me back 2 days later. "System meets code on their property," he said flatly. "Once water leaves their boundary, it's considered surface flow." Surface flow. That phrase stuck with me longer than I expected. It sounded so technical, neutral, almost innocent. like the water just wandered over on its own. But I knew better. I'd watched the pipe, seen the water fire out like a hose under pressure. The next storm hit, and the muddy patch didn't dry for a week. The mosquitoes started swarming. My dog started avoiding that part of the yard. I found myself staring out the window more often, waiting for the clouds. And somewhere between the third and fourth storm, something clicked. I stopped being annoyed and started documenting everything. I took out my phone during the next storm and filmed from the kitchen window. The rain, the patio, the pipe lighting up like it had a job to do. The water shot out in a clean arc, landing in the exact same spot in my yard every time. I filmed it all, panned out, zoomed in, narrated the date and time like I was recording evidence for a nature documentary no one had asked for. After that, I filmed every storm. I took photos of the grass turning yellow around the edges. I measured how long the water sat there. I even stuck a yardstick in the mud just to see how deep it got. 2.5 inches at the worst point. It wasn't catastrophic, but it wasn't nothing either. One evening, my wife Claire noticed what I was doing. "You building a case?" she asked, leaning against the counter. "I don't know yet," I said. "I just want to understand what's happening." She looked out the window at the fence. "It's not what's happening," she said quietly. "It's that he doesn't care." That part hit harder than I expected. See, Brandon and I weren't enemies. We weren't friends either. We were just neighbors, exchanging nods while taking out the trash. But there was something about the way he dismissed it all. The shrug, the joke about gravity, like the inconvenience didn't matter because it wasn't happening on his lawn. That's when I started digging. I found it buried in a PDF about stormwater drainage regulations. You cannot concentrate stormwater discharge and direct it onto an adjacent property. I read that line 3 times, feeling a sense of clarity wash over me. Directed discharge was illegal. But I didn't file a complaint. Not yet. I wasn't that neighbor, the one who escalates everything. There had to be another way to handle this. A few weeks later, the HOA sent out a reminder email about lawn maintenance and exterior improvements needing approval. That's when I overheard Brandon arguing on the phone in his driveway. "They approved the patio," he said. "They approved the drainage plan." That word, plan, hung in the air like a red flag. This wasn't an accident. It was deliberate. I started paying attention to the slope of our properties. My yard dipped gently toward the back fence. His yard sat lower, especially near the left corner. It was subtle, but it was there. And I was looking. I called a landscaper, Miguel, who'd worked for us before. He came out, examined the muddy patch, and nodded. "Yeah," he said, "this isn't just rain. It's being fed." I wanted a solution that didn't look like an eyesore. He sketched a shallow berm along the fence line. Nothing dramatic, just a foot-high mound with stone edging, hardy plants on top, designed to look intentional. Behind the stone, we packed it tight with gravel and soil to absorb and redirect water. When the HOA form came in asking about the improvement, I described it as erosion control and aesthetic enhancement, both true. Construction took 2 days. When it was done, it looked like it had always been there, an elegant raised bed running along the fence. The next storm came. Water poured off his patio, entered the pipe. But this time, it hit the berm and spread sideways, instead of drilling into my lawn. It shimmered there for a second, confused, before it slowly began moving toward the low corner of his yard. I didn't cheer. I didn't smile. I just watched. A few days later, Brandon came by. He looked different, no coffee mug, no easy smile. "Hey," he said, looking past me like he was checking to see if I had a camera. "My side yard's pretty soaked lately. Didn't used to be like that." I just nodded. "Yeah, we've had some heavy storms." He finally asked, "Did you change something back there?" I stepped outside, pulling the door mostly shut. The air smelled like wet soil and fresh-cut grass. "I did some landscaping," I said. "Built a berm to protect my yard from standing water. It was getting pretty bad." His eyes flicked to the fence. He knew exactly what I had done. And then he said, "The water seems to be collecting on my side now." I held his gaze. "I didn't redirect anything onto your property. I just prevented it from being dumped onto mine." He paused, recognizing the truth. "The contractor said it met code," he muttered. "Said it was fine. Once it leaves the property," I reminded him. A week later, a new crew showed up at his place, digging a trench and installing an underground extension to disperse the water properly. I watched from a distance. No gloating, just watching the correction happen. The next storm came. Water poured from his patio, entered the pipe. But this time, it disappeared underground. My yard stayed dry. A few days later, Brandon waved at me while I was bringing in the trash cans. It wasn't that stiff, forced wave from before. It was more human. "Drainage seems better," he said. "Yeah," I replied. "Looks like it. Should have handled it differently from the start," he added, a hint of regret in his voice. I shrugged. We both learned something. Here's the part that sticks with me, though. I never filed a complaint. I never threatened legal action. I never yelled. I just protected my space within the rules. I forced the issue not by attacking him, but by removing my willingness to absorb the consequences of his convenience. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd gone straight to the county. Maybe it would have escalated. Maybe lawyers would have gotten involved. Maybe we'd be the two houses on the block that never make eye contact at the annual barbecue. Or maybe he would have fixed it faster. I don't know. What I do know is this: protecting your space doesn't require shouting. It takes clarity, patience, and sometimes a little strategic landscaping. So here's my question for you. Was I right to handle it the way I did? Should I have filed a complaint from the start? Was building that berm a fair response, or just a passive-aggressive move disguised as gardening? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I genuinely want to know. And if you found this story interesting, hit like, subscribe, and share it with someone who's ever had to deal with a boundary that needed reinforcing. Trust me, it's better to build the berm before the swamp shows up.